Hey, what's up, everybody? It's Ned Bellavance, Ned1313 on Twitter, and welcome to the Daily Check-In for December 14th, 2020. It's Monday, which would usually be Professional Development Monday, but I am rounding out my coverage. Well, I've got one more after this, but I'm getting close to rounding out my coverage of Tech Field Day 22. I was a delegate, and one of the presenters was Red Hat. That is the topic for today. We're going to be talking about Red Hat and their approach to edge computing. What are they doing in the world of edge, especially around their OpenShift product? So that's what I'm going to talk about today. Hopefully that is of interest to you. Like I said, this is part of my Tech Field Day coverage, so I have a few other videos that are all part of Tech Field Day 22. You don't know what that is? Well, there's a link down in the description for the Tech Field Day event itself. And I was a delegate, which means I was a representative for you. I'm the voice of the audience talking to these vendors and trying to ask them difficult questions or clarifications for things that they're trying to pitch at you, the consumer. Do you want this thing? And I go, well, maybe, but here's some questions about why I might not want it. And, hopefully it's an interesting dialogue. And I thought that it certainly was. The videos from the event are all now live on YouTube, so I will include that in the description as well. I invite you to go watch the Red Hat presentation and then watch my thoughts on it if you want, or you can just let me summarize it all up for you. That works too. Before we get to that, let's check in. How you doing? Happy Monday. How's it going on Monday? I know some people, not big Monday people. I do not mind Mondays. I feel like I'm still coasting in from the weekend. There's a lot to do. My mind stays very active all through Monday, and I feel like I got some energy. It's usually like Tuesday that I start lagging, but then I have Terraform Tuesday, and that kind of saves me. So hopefully your Monday is going well. Let's talk about Red Hat and the edge. All right, what's going on here? What is Red Hat trying to do? Well, Red Hat has a product called OpenShift, and we'll probably start there. OpenShift is their variant on Kubernetes, and it actually started pre-Kubernetes. So it was their idea of a container orchestration and management platform with some additional bits sprinkled in for developers and operators. So it has an actual UI instead of the all command line of Kubernetes. It has a repository for, I think it does some level of source code repository, but it also has an image repository for containers. So it has its own baked in version of Quay. So you can use that to store all of your images for containers. And it's got some other interesting tools and things that are bolted on top of what is essentially vanilla Kubernetes. So they've customized it a bit, but that's what their offering is. Now, when they gave the presentation, what they were trying to get at was how can they extend what they're doing in OpenShift out to the edge? And that is a question, as well as what is the edge is often a question. Well, let's clarify what they're talking about when they're referring to the edge. They're not just referring to the far edge, your IoT devices and your Raspberry Pis and PCBs and all that kind of stuff. They're referring to the entire spectrum of the edge, from the cloud to your data center to any intermediary points along that path, going all the way out to the far edge device that's gathering data or making decisions, whatever that device is doing. So for them, the edge is the spectrum. And when they take a look at it that way, they wanted to develop products that could plug into different components of that spectrum. So they've developed this control plane / worker node sort of mentality, which makes sense in the context of Kubernetes. You have your master controllers, and then you have your worker nodes. Well, this is the same thing, right? Except the control plane has the additional stuff that makes up OpenShift on top of Kubernetes, and I assume that the worker nodes also have to run some of those components. The models that they were showing was they had what was basically a 3-node cluster that would go in a rack, probably. It needs a bit of space and a bit of power. And that 3-node cluster included both the worker nodes and the control plane, both running on the nodes. And you could expand that out to additional nodes up to a certain point. So that was their first model. And that could be an intermediary point that has, solid power and cooling, a micro data center, if you will. And then they showed another model where you're going to run the control plane from that micro data center, but you might have your worker nodes distributed out to different buildings or, different factories or something like that. And so you had your control plane running one place and then a bunch of worker nodes running other places. And they said that the control plane, as designed, can scale to 2,000 worker nodes. So you can imagine that's a lot of worker nodes. What it can't do is scale really far in terms of distance. So you're limited to a maximum of 200 milliseconds. So you're not going to have a control plane sitting. Well, actually, that's pretty good. Basically, you're not going to have a control plane that is sitting in one city controlling worker nodes that are running on another continent. That's not the model that they're going for here. But it does allow you to have a centralized control plane hooking into these worker nodes. And then finally, they had, for what you might call disconnected scenarios, imagine something that's moving, like a tank, I don't know, something that's moving but needs this stuff on board and is not going to have a reliable and stable connection to the internet. They had a single node version of their appliance that's running one control plane and one worker node, basically, and that's it. So those were their different flavors. And each node needs to be fairly robust in this configuration because it is running the whole of OpenShift, or at least all the bits that are included in the control plane or the worker node for OpenShift. So I believe they said the worker node needs to have something like 16 CPUs, that's vCPUs, of course, so 16 cores, and 64 gig of RAM. That is not a Raspberry Pi, ladies and gentlemen. That is not a tiny device that you're going to wedge in somewhere. That is a decent setup. Now, in fairness, you can get those kind of specs in a pretty small form factor. I have right down here, I have an Intel NUC, Cannon Lake, I think maybe, and it has not 16 CPUs, but I think it has 8 cores, and it also has 64 gig of RAM. So you can do it. If I could double the CPU on this thing, I would be there. So it can still be a relatively small form factor, but it does need reliable power and cooling. This is not going to be a small field replaceable IoT device running OpenShift. And I asked about that. I said, are you looking to target smaller devices with a stripped down distribution of Kubernetes? Because one of the things that you've seen other projects jump into for Kubernetes is something like K3S from Rancher Labs, which is a slimmed down version of Kubernetes. But the thing is, it's not pure Kubernetes. It's not part of the upstream Kubernetes. It's a customized version where they've stripped out components and streamlined it. Another version is MicroK8s, and I think that might be from Canonical, and there's a few other variants of stripped down Kubernetes, but so far none of them are upstream Kubernetes. And that's something that OpenShift and Red Hat really want to support. So basically, the presenter said they don't have anything formal to announce. Keep an eye out for things that might be coming next year, but they are working on all of these smaller distributions and seeing how it can fit into OpenShift. Getting it into upstream Kubernetes is one battle they have to fight, but the other part of that is OpenShift is more than just Kubernetes. It has all these additional components. So are you willing to give up the container image repository? Are you willing to give up some of the dev tools? There's something called Odo that's used there. Are you willing to give up the UI? What components of the OpenShift product are you willing to give up to get it shrunk down and running on these smaller, lower powered and lower cost devices? And I said, I don't know. I'm not the one building this stuff out. I just know that it's out there, and I was curious where they were going with it. So keep an eye out for that. Then they showed a use case for where their solution might actually be used, and it was a telco use case. And this, they brought up 4G and 5G, but it wasn't just the buzzword of 4G and 5G. Something that 4G, like next generation, and 5G is able to do is something called local breakout, which means if I want to communicate with another device over the cellular network, I don't have to backhaul all the way to a central office. It can do the breakout locally at one of the towers and route the traffic that way instead of hairpinning it to a CO or something like that. That's the way that all cellular technology works today. If I call you and you're standing right next to me, it will go to the cell tower, up to the CO, maybe to an aggregation point above that, and then all the way back down to the phone that the person next to me is holding. That doesn't make any sense, but that's the way the technology works. With local breakout, it could hit that cell tower and then route that call directly to your phone. That'd be pretty cool. And that's much more important for IoT type applications than it is for me making a phone call to you standing next to me, obviously. But it was a good example of how they can use their solution to help implement this new technology. So that was pretty cool. The last thing that they talked about was this idea of solution blueprints. And I really had to chew on this for a while, and I'm still not sold on the idea. This was borrowed from the Acrano project. I think that's how you say it, which is part of the LF Edge Foundation, which is the Linux Foundation's Edge focus component. And the idea behind blueprints is let's create a set of standards and a template that can be applied to an environment to create a standardized blueprint of how something should be designed and built. And the example that they gave was basically a machine learning suite that's attached to factory floor devices that are streaming telemetry and all that kind of jazz. It was pretty cool, but when you actually dig into it, a lot of the components are just white paper stuff. It's just describing how something should be laid out. And there's not a whole lot of specifications over what technologies should be used to get it deployed. Am I using bash scripts? Am I using Terraform? Am I using Ansible to get this stuff deployed? There wasn't a whole lot of information around formats for how a particular deployment should be formatted. And there was at least 20 different technologies being implemented in their blueprint. So for me, it was, okay, this is more of a design document than a blueprint per se. I think of a blueprint as something actionable and I can just start building. This was more of a, here's a design document and maybe some scripts and templates to go with it, but then it's up to you to kind of snap into all that. And they talked about how this could go into a GitOps thing, so you can store the whole blueprint in a source control and then do revisions on it and that kind of thing, which, I mean, you can do that with any document. Anything that you can put into text, you can put into source control. So like, I get the idea. I like the idea of GitOps, and I like that they're kind of on board with that, but I wasn't 100% sold on it. So the main thing I want to say is I think they're on the right track for their edge deployments of OpenShift, focusing on the bigger stuff first and then miniaturizing. And I'm curious to see where they go next. That's all the time I have for today. Thank you for watching. I'd love to hear your thoughts once you watch the presentation. Am I wildly off base on edge or solution blueprints? Let me know. But like I said, that's all I got for today. Please subscribe and share. And until next time, stay healthy, stay safe out there. Bye for now.